Coming up, Scott Jennings teaches CNN about the Constitution. Ted Cruz talks about big tech censorship, and the Democrats' radical gender push is discussed. Scott Jennings points out some not at all subtle points about the Constitution.
The principles of the Constitution, and at times
how is Trump shredding the Constitution?
My God, he's like
seriously, do we have to give you a civics lesson that we have?
I don't know.
We put all power in the executive branch, the legislative branch, the FBI. Now we're in control of the military, silencing media. This is what you do in a dictatorship.
Are you suggesting that the president is not the commander-in-chief of the military?
I am suggesting that the president is going to put in charge somebody who is going to contravene the Constitution. And at some near point, this conversation will look very silly for you because it will be obvious. And right now, you're gaslighting. But when we get to the actual rubber of the road of this, it will be clear.
I'm interested in this conversation. He's going to put someone in charge who will contravene the Constitution. Like, who? What do you mean by that? The president is in charge of the military, is he not? You said he's going to put someone in charge of the military?
The president is in charge of the military. That is how it works.
This is important conversation.
Yeah, I mean...
Alicia Johnson, a former senior advisor on the Harris campaign, tries to say that Trump is shredding the Constitution. There are stupid points here made by Democrats and fellow travellers. First up, they talk about things that Trump has done that they, being Democrats, clearly don't like. But the crazy thing is that they then try to say that these things are unconstitutional, despite these powers clearly lying in the president's ambit. As for Touré's comment about the president putting in someone who potentially will contravene the Constitution, utterly clueless. First up, the president is the commander-in-chief of the military. Second, if he wanted to contravene the Constitution, he wouldn't have to use someone else to do that, someone who does not have as much power as the president himself has. Then further to that, this guy suggests that he will put someone in charge who will contravene the Constitution. A whole lot of ifs, ands, and maybes. And talking about the military, here is Pete Hegseth on the cartels.
The cartels, they're watching all this. What's your message to them?
Oh, my message has been from the beginning, we're taking nothing off the table. Nothing. We will do whatever it takes to secure the American homeland, to maintain our sovereignty, and protect the American people.
Does that mean you're ruling out potential strikes inside of Mexico on fentanyl labs that we know they exist, and we know where they exist?
No, I don't think I ruled anything out. Anything's on the table. The commander-in-chief, ultimately, with my consultation and with the chairman and others, will make those determinations, but nothing's off the table. Our sovereignty will be defended.
Hegseth says absolutely nothing is off the table as far as potential action against the cartels is concerned. US sovereignty will be defended, even if that potentially means striking at fentanyl labs in Mexico itself. But just to show how stupid Touré's point was in the previous piece, Hegseth says explicitly that it will be done with the approval of the commander-in-chief, that being the president. If you enjoyed this content, please like, share and subscribe. Then we have Senator Ted Cruz on big tech.
I'm the new chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. We have jurisdiction over about 40% of the U.S. economy, and that includes all of big tech. That includes AI and big tech, and when it comes to big tech censorship, I think big tech censorship is the single greatest threat to free speech in America and the single greatest threat to free and fair elections. And so, as chairman of the Commerce Committee, we are going to use the authority of the Commerce Committee, including subpoenas, to go after, to expose censorship, and to stop it. And so we've actually noticed subpoenas that the committee will be voting on next week, and it's the first in what I expect to be multiple subpoenas, because we are going to bring transparency, and we are going to stop big tech censorship practices.
Cruz's committee oversees big tech among a host of others. He wants to put out multiple subpoenas on big tech to fully evaluate what they're doing as far as free speech and censorship is concerned. Freedom of speech is critical to the function of any free society. People are entitled to have all of the information available to them, and that includes all sorts of viewpoints, whether some may find it palatable or not. The Democrats and those on the left do not want their lily-livered followers exposed to any challenging ideas or anything they may feel insulted by. Tough. Nobody ever said life was being put in a baby's crib from birth to death. Life is hard, and people need to realize that some people will say things that you may feel insulted by. That is the nature of it. If you want the benefits of a free society, then you have to realize what constitutes the free society, whose benefits you enjoy. Critical among those is freedom of speech and freedom of expression. Cruz continues.
What's the end result here? Is it just exposure, or do you actually feel like you might be able to get some legal action?
Well, listen, it's both, but you start with exposure because big tech often hides behind, they deny that they're doing anything, and they're the custodians of all the information. So, if someone is shadow banned on old Twitter or on Facebook, right, they say, well, there's no empirical evidence, there's no data that show this is happening. It's like, well, that's because you have all the data. Right. And so exposing it is the first step. There are lots of tools. I'll tell you, I've met with President Trump's chairman of his FCC and the chairman of the FTC, in addition to many officials at the Department of Justice. And I believe this administration is going to use the law enforcement power of the federal government, is going to use the antitrust laws and the consumer protection laws to go after big tech censorship.
Cruz says that the committee needs to be able to have access to the information and data that will allow people to see the data to find whether there is censorship with big tech or not. He says that exposure is the first step. In fact, this is extremely important. We can see, for example, how quickly the likes of Facebook went about face when their censorship was exposed. What is further needed for the future is legislation to prevent what the Biden administration did at the time of COVID with censoring inconvenient views. The Democrats clearly will fight this. They believe it is government's place, and particularly Democrat government's place, to define what speech is allowed and what speech isn't. The thing that was so bad during COVID is that the censorship itself was hidden in the shadows. As such, people weren't aware of some other options on COVID policy, and even if they were under the impression that the consensus around COVID policy was much stronger than it was, because so many with contrary opinions were silenced without that being made clear that that perspective was being silenced. Then we have Meg Brock on children transitioning.
Conversation between an Obama bro and Bill Maher. He's saying, leave this up to people to decide. But we don't leave it up to children to decide whether or not they drink, whether or not they take drugs, whether or not they get tattoos. Why is it all of a sudden a message of libertarian personal liberty if a kid wants to change his medical situation, his gender?
Well, there are two sexes, and we know that from simple biology. There's an ova and there's a sperm. There's no third gamete. When President Trump signed the order ending the mutilation of children through alleged sex change, he was right to call it that. We don't let anyone abuse children in this country. And when you see 12-year-old little girls, for example, having their breasts removed, being sterilized, having these medical treatments that are extremely experimental, all to sell them a lie that you can change your sex.
The points made here are very true. In a way, this is medical experimentation on children. The long-term impact of permanently changing gender is not known. There are simply not enough data. What we do know is that the rates of things like suicides are far higher than for the general community. That alone should give us pause. It is evident that there is a mental health problem mixed up with everything else associated with transition. As such, the first step should be counselling. And any form of surgery changing physical aspects of sex should be banned for minors. As the participants in this interview stated, we don't allow children to make their own decisions as far as things like drinking, driving, or smoking are concerned. We should definitely not be doing so with something as immutable as sexual reassignment. What do you think about Ted Cruz's proposed actions regarding big tech? Please let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.